Welcome back to another reflection. I want to welcome everybody here. If you have not met me before, my name is Rachel. I host the Wool and Spinning podcast here on YouTube. It is a pleasure to be here with you for another month. We are spending some time this month talking about repetition, the role of repetition in learning fiber arts skills. I think one of the things that we often overlook in our doing of fiber arts is how much we are repeating those skills over and over and over again. I want to spend some time to talk about that today. I have not been doing a ton of making over the last couple of weeks, and part of that is because I just got completely, I don't think burned out is the right word, but I got completely I finished a whole bunch of stuff that I was working on, and we were in this transition period where we're still living with my mom because we're renovating our own home, which was a fixer-upper and needed some TLC. And so we've been sort of in this transition mode of moving back into our home, and there's been a lot of back and forth and driving. The weather's been getting warmer, so we've been spending a lot of time outside, and all of a sudden I found myself sort of not having a project to work on. I literally don't have anything on the needles right at this moment. I have a couple of projects that I'm planning and some things that I'm thinking about, but they're not actually on the needles yet. But I was thinking about, as I was finishing off these last two projects in particular, how much we do the same thing over and over and over again. And I think for some people that rote repetition can feel very monotonous, and it can feel at some point where you just get to a point where you're like, enough, I can't do anymore. And I think sometimes I get to that point with certain projects where I'm like, I need a break from this for a few minutes. It doesn't mean it's not still creative. It doesn't mean it doesn't not still feed me. It just means that I'm not quite as dialed in with that side of my creativity as I maybe was a week or two ago, or even a month ago. So let's delve into this subject a little bit more. If you are new here and you are just checking out Wool and Spinning and you're just meeting me and learning about what we do here and what we offer, I would love to have you hit the subscribe button. Down below in the down bar, there is a Start Here guide for people who are curious and want to know more about the community. That will take you to a post that gives you sort of a rundown of what to expect. And if that is something that you are interested in, then I look forward to hearing from you. For those who have been around for a long time, there's nothing that you need to do. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in for another reflection vlog. So, repetition often gets framed as something that is boring or that it's really super basic. And I think when you look at the fiber arts and you look at the skills that we acquire as we deepen our practice, nothing could be further from the truth. Fiber arts and the practice that it takes to become a master is far from boring. There is a repetitiveness to it though, and I think that's why it then gets framed as boring or basic. And I think as we hone our skills and as we get further along, it's easy to just say, oh, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. Meanwhile, you're learning all these things while you're sitting at the wheel, appearing as if you're doing the same thing over and over again. It's where the most learning actually happens, is in that repetition and in that mindful practice that we all need to engage in to get to that point of being able to create the yarns that we want to create and being able to create the fabrics that we want to create. So that early relationship with repetition can sometimes we want novelty. Sometimes we're moving on too quickly to the next skill. And sometimes we're mistaking repetition for stagnation. So think of those really big sweater spins. Those are kind of like the holy grail of spins when you're first a new spinner. And then you start to get into it and you sort of get like the first 100 grams done, and then you get the first 125 grams done, and then you get another 50 grams done, and you're like, oh, sweet mother of pearl, I'm still not done this spin. And we start to want novelty. And so you'll hear, especially in our community, you'll hear somebody, they'll post about wanting a snack spin. Something quick, something novel, something that just gets your creative juices going and gets you back into the zone. Absolutely. Or they'll work on that big spin and they'll abandon it. They'll move on to something else and they'll move on too quickly. And that also means that learning that needs to happen in that big spin and that repetition of just doing a big spin gets lost. Sometimes we can move on to another project and then we can come back to said project and pick up where we left off in terms of the learning and the deepening of practice that we were working on. Sometimes not. So I would encourage you in those early days to stick with those big spins, even though they feel boring or they feel basic. And this is where we sometimes mistake repetition for stagnation, because often in those early spins, our draft isn't consistent, our fingers get tired, our treadling isn't consistent and isn't even, and some of the mechanics of the whole thing coming together isn't as on point as we think that it is. And so we think that we're just sitting there doing the same thing over and over again. Meanwhile, we're drafting a different length every time. We're changing our draft as we go. We're not treadling consistently. Every time we get up and sit back down, it's a little bit different. So we think that we're stagnating and that we're stuck in this big project. Meanwhile, there's all this learning that could be going on. And that's where we need to dig into. That's where we need to pay attention. Over time, repetition has really taught me that subtle differences emerge in our practice without us even realizing. So if I'm doing something like, let's say I'm lock popping a fleece. So a lock pop is a wooden block, and you just bang the lock on top of the wood in the thick, deep tines to open up the lock, and then you switch it around, do the same thing. Very similar to flicking. It's a way of getting fleece open and ready for processing for the next step of fiber prep. As you work your way through a fleece, you can see how the fleece changes and those subtle differences, and you have to change how you're approaching each lock as you work your way through, especially a fleece that's not overall uniform, and all of those subtleties will affect how you approach the lock pop. It sounds really basic, right? It sounds almost kind of a bit like elementary. It's not. You have to adjust, and the more time that you spend learning that, the more you realize, and then you start to do it with just on autopilot. You don't even think about it. Meanwhile, your brain is just completely, meandering onto another path, and all these creative juices are flowing, and you're kind of in this mindful meditation, moving meditation kind of place while you're lock popping. But you had to initially do that work of learning how to adjust your practice as you go. It's the same with our spinning drafts as we work through a big spin. It's the same with our spindling practice as we work through a big spin. Same with knitting, it's the same with crochet, it's the same with weaving. We have to watch for those subtle differences within our practice as we engage in that repetition. Our hands learn before we have the words for something. So often we are doing something and we're doing it well before we have the words to describe it and to then turn around and explain it to someone else. This is actually really important. That time spent at the wheel in that moving meditation, we talked last month about like our heart rates coming down, our CNS resting, all of those things that we get through engaging in this slow process, in this slow making process. All of those things, our body learns these things before we have the words to describe it. And if we spend that time engaging in the practice, eventually the words will come. Our confidence grows very quietly, very slowly. I had it described to me once. If you think about our inner audience, so our confidence comes from the feedback that we get from those around us and our inner audience. And I love this idea of an inner audience. It's sort of this idea of like this audience that's quietly watching us. Some people in psychology describe it as like the sixth sense, or your inner voice. Some people describe it as this inner audience. And I really like the idea of an audience because sometimes the voices sound a bit different. Sometimes the voices are those that can really cut us down, and sometimes those voices are really positive and really build us up. But our inner audience, when we do well and when we're doing well, is very quiet, and we have to really listen. And I think that's really important in today's world where there is so much noise, and there is so much noise from social media, and there is so much noise from the outside world. We're constantly getting feedback about things we didn't even ask for feedback on. And it's all, marketing and advertising, all that stuff. When we do something well, and when we're mastering something and we're getting to that point where we are sort of moving along the learning spectrum, and the curve isn't quite so curvy anymore, it's a little bit flatter, and we feel like we're getting to the point where we really mastered something. all we often get from our inner audience is a little thumbs up. Thumbs up, you did good. And that's it. We have to really listen to that. And it is very quiet. And you have to tune into it, and you have to spend, like, we all have to take that step back to listen to that thumbs up. Thumbs up. That's it. That's all we're going to get. You know, you went for a walk today. Thumbs up. That's all we get from our inner audience. It's very, very quiet. There's a reason why people who meditate and feel that sort of inner calm, like, you know how some people just kind of come off as like they just kind of have it naturally, and then some people really had to work on it. I really admire people who've really done that inner work of really trying to tune into that inner voice. And I know a dear, dear friend of mine, I've known her for 25 years. She calls that inner audience Josephine, which I just love. She calls her Josephine. And when Josephine's ticked off, Josephine can just berate her and be so mean. But when she's doing well, Josephine's quite quiet. And I'm amazed that my dear friend picked up on that. And I thought it was so insightful. So because confidence does grow quietly, and it is something that can be very, very subtle, as we practice and as we go through the rote repetition of just, you know, when we're spinning, like, it's not very interesting, right? It's the same thing over and over again. Continuous backward draft is draft, 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 on, draft, 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 on. And you're doing that for miles and miles and miles of yardage, right? And all you get is a little thumbs up at the end. But if you tune into that, it can be really revolutionary in terms of guiding you in the right direction. Because I find with me, when I'm getting that little thumbs up, I know that I'm headed in the right direction with my creativity. I know that I'm building on skills that are going to continue to bloom and continue to grow, and I'm going to continue to learn. And I get that little thumbs up, that little, you did it, well done, that was good, you know, and then you're on to the next thing. And that's really helped me in my practice to be in that moment. Repetition and mindlessness, this is really difficult. So when we engage in sort of what I would consider more of like a moving meditation, where we're really trying to be present in the moment, attentive repetition, that looks different from mindlessness, just zoning out and not being present and allowing ourselves to just kind of be there. We're doing short forward, that's it, but we're miles away. Whenever that happens to me, and it's usually because I'm really distracted by something, there's something going on that I need to kind of, you know, muddle my way through, I know that I probably need to just take a moment to bring myself back to the moment. And that really attentive repetitiveness for me is when I've really been able to make a big jump in skill, because I'm there, I'm in the moment, I'm kind of just a sled dog, just doing the work, and I'm there and I'm learning, and it's becoming more and more and more intuitive. Curiosity. You guys, if you know me in real life, I am constantly using the word curiosity, get curious, what, you know, just why, what, asking lots of, what is it? The five W's and an H, the, you know, who, what, where, when, why, and how. Get curious. Show up in your practice curious. What is going on here? Why is that happening? I don't know. Use the community. Ask them questions. Find out what's happening, get curious, ask all the questions. What fiber am I working with? Why is it working? Why is it not working? What tools would work the best for this? This is a lot of what we talk about in color moments within the Patreon community, as well as wool moments within the Patreon community. What am I seeing? What am I feeling? What am I thinking about? How is this going to play out in a bigger project? What might this look like? How could we spin this in a way that would really augment the attributes of whatever it is that we've chosen? Show up with curiousness. Curiosity does not show up in moments of mindlessness when we're not present. It's just not there. We often, when we're not in the moment, when we're not present, it shows we can't be curious if we're distracted, or our minds are somewhere else, or we're not paying attention, or I think for me, it's often I'm distracted. There's something else going on that's taking up all my brain power and my brain can't brain. Usually there's something happening that I need to muddle my way through. And that's okay too. It's just recognizing that it's a different state of mind. And letting questions evolve. This kind of, I already kind of went into this with the curiosity, but, you know, asking, you know, what are we working with? Why is this important? How is this going to affect affect, how am I going to build on my current practice to improve in certain areas? There's always something that we're all working on that we want to get better at. What I see when people stick with one thing for a long period of time is I see their learning curve starts to even out. It's not quite as steep and it doesn't feel quite as uncomfortable. I see people asking really thoughtful questions. I see people being very reflective about their practice and looking at their practice from more just it becomes more than just, I spun this yarn, yay. It becomes more about how they felt, what they were thinking about, what the fibers were that were included and how that affected the final yarn, how they finished it, what they were thinking about making, what kind of fabric are they creating. All of a sudden, this whole world opens up. And so when I see people engaged at that level and getting curious like that, I mean, obviously my heart sings, but that's what happens when we engage in that repetition. The other thing that I see when people are engaged mindfully versus sort of tuning out is their confidence grows. It's just like what we talked about a minute ago with my friend Jackie's Josephine. They feel better about themselves. Their confidence grows. They start to teach others and share their knowledge with others. And they start to kind of go out into the world, if you will, which is the goal. We want more people doing the work, to bring more people in, to do more work, to share, this side of life that we can lead creative lives in this world. And that's so important in today's world. Art and creativity, music, these things have never been more important. Never been more important. And the shift from comfort to ease. I think we start out when we're at the beginning of our spinning journey, especially, and it feels really uncomfortable. It feels really, it's like your hands aren't even your own hands anymore, and your feet aren't your own hands, and you're trying to, tap your head and rub your tummy at the same time, and you're just thinking like, how am I going to do this? And as you repeat that over and over again, how to do the different drafts, fiber prep, all those different things, there's an ease that starts to come into our practice that we can sit down and move into that moving meditation more quickly than we would have otherwise been able to when we're first learning. And that's time, just putting in the time, putting in the daily practice. And we've talked about that a lot in our community, and it's really important. You just have to put in the time. You kind of got to be a sled dog, and you got to just put your head down, and you got to just do the work. And we will sit there with you and do it with you. So repetition is a form of care. And I want to remind all of us that the reason for engaging in creativity is to care for ourselves. It's also to care for others, because if we're caring for ourselves, we can then turn around. Our bucket literally is filled up, and we're then able to care for others. If we're pulling from an empty bucket or an empty well all the time, there is nothing left to give to others. So when people in our lives, friends, family, passersby on the street need something from us, it feels like they're because we're pulling from an empty bucket. That can fuel a lot of resentment, anger, frustration, irritation. But when we have a full bucket and we have a full well to draw from, all of a sudden we have a little bit more grace. We have a little bit more to give. We have a little bit more kindness, a little bit more compassion. We can put ourselves in that other person's shoes and be empathetic. There is a huge lack of empathy in this world that we are living in right now, and caring about other people and caring about what's going on around us in our communities, in our towns, in our country, in our world is more important than ever, as we all know. And that repetition in caring for ourselves and learning our craft and being good at our craft increases our confidence. It translates as caring for ourselves, filling our own buckets, and then turning around and being able to care for others around us. Mastery often looks really unremarkable on the outside. When I tell people what I do, and I tell people, when they ask, well, what do you do? It's sort of unremarkable. It's like, oh, you make fabric. Okay. You teach others how to make fabric. Okay. Creativity has never been more important, as we just said, but it often kind of looks unremarkable. And that's where that confidence thing comes from. What's your inner audience saying? Watch for those thumbs up. Watch for those well dones. That little thought that goes through your head that's, well done, you nailed that. That's very good. Sharing with others. If there's a community that was ever better at propping each other up and giving each other kudos, it is the woolen spinning community. Trust me. I think sometimes it can go unnoticed, and our friends and family members aren't really too sure why we're so in in love with this craft that we do and this making that we do. And that's okay. We don't have to advertise it to the world. We can just put our heads down and we can carry on, because we are doing something to feed ourselves and to feed our creativity. And that, unfortunately, that repetition is part of that. So stay with something longer than it feels comfortable. Next time you've got a big, long spin, I really encourage you to try to stick it out to the end and don't start something new in the meantime. And then afterwards, reflect on what you learned. Was it completely painful and like the worst experience of your life? Maybe shorter spins are going to be a better option for you. What did you learn? Focus on trying to keep your draft consistent. Focus on trying to keep your treadling consistent. Focus on trying to create the same singles at the beginning as you did at the end, and the same plied angle of that finished plied yarn at the beginning as you are creating at the end. Take a moment to rewind your singles and see how that affects your yarn. If we're not quite as outcome driven, then we can engage a little bit more and a little bit deeper in the process. And often, when we stay with something a little bit longer, we're that much more proud, and we get that much more of a little bump from our inner audience saying, hey, good job. Like, you really got that. You nailed that. This changes with both skill and satisfaction. As we engage in these repetitive motions, what feels like the same thing over and over again, our skill increases, our satisfaction and our confidence in the process increases and continues to improve, and we come away more whole than we were when we started. And I think that's really important. Sometimes it feels like we're living in this world that's going to blow up any moment, and that everything's going to come to an end anyways, and what's the point? And I think if we can continue to lead a really creative life and really engage in loving one another and being a part of a larger community that is engaged in creativity and lifting one another up, we will be the better for it. And I hope that as we enter the spring, and well, actually, no, we're entering the summer now in the Northern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, you guys are entering the winter, and I hope that you're warm and cozy and finding all of those lovely wool knits hidden in your closets from being hidden over the summer, that you're staying nice and warm and cozy. And for those of us in this Northern Hemisphere who are entering the summer, I hope that maybe some summer knits, maybe some short sleeve stuff where you don't have to go on Sleeve Island and do an entire sleeve, but you can finish off just a short knit, would be something that would fill your bucket for the next couple of months. So until next time, happy spinning, happy making. Thank you so much for joining me here. Like I said, if you're new here, please have a look at the Start Here guide down below. And for everybody else, have a wonderful rest of your month. Bye, everyone.